Welcome to the Woman's Connection. I'm barrie-Louise, your moderator. The Woman's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned?
Welcome. According to the American Express Open Forum 2014 report, New York State is home to 682,200 female-owned firms, the third most of any state. In New York alone, it grew by 73% from 1997 to 2014. And New York City grew the number of women-owned businesses by 30.4% since 2002. With me are three entrepreneurs, but what's interesting about the three of them is they're from one family. And I would like to welcome Leah Poehler, Laura McCann, and Karen McCann. They have got quite an interesting story to tell. And I would like to start with Leah to find out how it all came about. Because Leah, obviously, being the mother, indoctrinated all her children. Leah, you're an artist and you're an entrepreneur. How did this all develop?
Well, first, I wasn't always an artist. I was a single mother supporting children, so that's where the entrepreneurship came. But I believe that the real credit has to go to my parents, who were also very entrepreneurial. My dad was a self-made man, had many, many different, very interesting professions, and the rule of thumb was bring it home, don't leave it in the office.
Well, that's an interesting comment. What did he mean by bring it home, don't leave it in the office?
Well, he was very much a family man as well, and my mother and he worked together. They didn't want to sacrifice their children to their own ambitions, and so they included us.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Okay. Now, as I understand it from reading on your background, that you were living in Florida and circumstances made you move to France.
Yes.
And you had a language barrier there that you had to learn, or did you know French?
Well, I thought I knew it till I got there. Once I got there, it was baptism by fire. But in fact, I went to France just for 3 months to brush up on my French, and I ended up staying for 20 years.
Wow.
For other reasons than the reasons that took me there to begin with.
Then how did you make a living in France, learning French by baptism, by the fire? How did you support yourself?
Oh, I'm not sure in the beginning. I think it was one giant fog of day-to-day survival. But eventually, I was able to get my first job as an English language speaker for a Frenchman. And from that moment, I was able to also get my working papers. Then I segued into the film industry, where my 2 languages were very helpful. And after that, I became my own business person.
Did you find difficulties? Because we're not talking the 21st century, we're talking the 20th century as a female entrepreneur.
Well, you know, that's an area that has been on my mind a great deal lately. Why was it possible under those circumstances to do what I did with 3 young children, not speaking the language, not having any fallback position? And I must say that one of the critical factors was that the women's lib in the United States at that time was very much a social upheaval, whereas in France it was just the opposite. They looked at the role of a woman in society. They said a woman needed support for young children, so they had the nurseries. They gave them access to equal education, and salaries were equal as well. And so it was a very quiet revolution, very simple, and it allowed me to just kind of slip into the next wave of what was possible for women. That said, in the movie industry, there were very few roles that a woman could fulfill: script, production assistant, etc.
Interesting. Laura, how did you feel growing up? I understand that you were in the movies.
Yeah, so when we moved to France, I was 7 years old, and I have a sister and a brother. I'm the middle child. And it was same as Leia described, learning a language, learning a culture. But I think what it did is it gave me some tools to become very adaptable and very flexible. I kind of think of it as like a database in your head. You have access to different folders that are, language, society, contrasting with our American upbringing, because we would come back to the States all the time. And it really gave me different tools, and being an actress gave me tools that I didn't even recognize would be useful until much later in life as an entrepreneur, where you have to do a lot of public speaking, you have to go out and ask for things and present yourself to the world, and certainly that helped a lot too.
Now, as a child growing up in France, you feel different than your friends because you have this knowledge? Or did they speak French? Speak English also?
No, back in those days, it wasn't as global a world as it is today. And so the notion that you were different was very clear because the children didn't speak the language. You had to adapt to their language. And we didn't have things like internet and Google and things like that. Television. Yeah, they hardly had any television in France, which I think was a blessing in disguise. So, it was, learn to get around a big city. We lived in Paris. You're taking the subway when you're very young, you're getting from here to there, you're figuring out how to ask for food. All your basic survival skills are tested, and it gives you a sense that you have more courage than you realize, perhaps.
You grew up basically in, the 90s or the 80s?
No, 70s.
Oh, you grew up in the 70s.
Yeah. That's another family trait, really good genes. So nobody knows how old I am until you meet my daughter, and then you can start doing the math. You'll be like, wait, how old were you when you had her? No, I was not a child, I guarantee you. But yeah, it was 1972 when we moved to France. So this was, the hippies and, the Vietnam War was ending, and here we were, these American kids with American mom in Paris, and it was an incredible experience. It was it's interesting. I'd say our family is a good mix of bohemian and bourgeois, and so that fit kind of interesting in France because they had both. They had the '68 revolution and that whole thing where they're sort of on one extreme, and then it's also just a very traditional society, and so we had a nice mix of both, which I think made us very colorful.
Very true. Karen, how do you feel growing up after the fact of not missing out on living in France, or did you live in France?
I never lived in France, and I'm probably, other than my brother, the only person in the family who wouldn't be bilingual, and I blame you. I would say I had a similar upbringing, though, in that for similar circumstances, my mom moved from New Jersey to New York City, and we were kind of thrust into this very similar dynamic of learning how to function and grow in a really big city full of lots of different people who are very different and very entrepreneurial and very motivated to succeed. So from a very early age, I've just been surrounded by people who know what they want and they go and do it. And so that's what I've been learning how to do.
Well, how did you feel growing up with a mother who was an entrepreneur?
It's interesting. Somebody the other night asked me, how did I feel growing up with a mother who was an artist? And so what's interesting about my upbringing is that Leia was an artist when we moved to France. She had studied art for a little bit in college and then really knew that she wanted to be an artist. And so she joined the Beaux-Arts school in Paris, which was a really famous school, and actually got in the program at an age where most of the people were probably, considered too old. And she would take me to her new drawing classes and her sculpture classes and sneak me in, and I got to see that part of it. But she always had to work to support the family. So I also saw that. And so, it was not abnormal that she would get home at 8 o'clock at night and that we, the kids, were responsible for the shopping and the cooking and the making dinner. And so she would come home and we would be the ones making dinner. And she didn't leave us alone. We had people who came and helped during the day, but we were just very independent, and we had a lot of skills that probably kids at that age didn't have to use. And it was a different upbringing. Leia never had a conversation that we were children. We were full people, and we could be the people that we were. You know, and as an entrepreneur, she had many different businesses. You know, she had a publishing business. You know, she was always an artist and had an art studio in the home. She was in the film business. She's done all kinds of really exciting, interesting things. And we never really understood business. And I saw this with my own daughters. Like, until you end up in the workforce, you don't really understand what your parents do, and you might not even say, like, what do you do? And you think you know, but you really don't know. But we would go to the offices where she would work. We would meet the people that she worked for. And so you had a little bit of a feeling, before these TV shows like, Made, where you actually see what a business is or a career is. We had to kind of put the pieces together and figure that out. It was a very fragmented picture.
So when you were going out on your own, how did you decide to become an entrepreneur? I mean, I see the evolution. It's kind of like self-perpetuating. Did you feel funny going for a job in the so-called 9-to-5 world?
Yeah. So I went to Parsons School of Design in the 1980s. Some of the people that were in school right ahead of me were Michael Kors and Marc Jacobs and people like that. And I knew I liked fashion. I knew I wanted to do something creative, but I really didn't understand anything about the business of fashion. About 5 years into my career, after having had an interesting sort of educational experience working for all kinds of flavorful people on Broadway, I didn't go the 7th Avenue way. I went the Broadway, the real schmata business, garment center. I kept being told by people that I should start my own business because I knew too much to be sort of like doing one thing. And I just thought that was odd. Back in those days, they just started having magazines like Inc. and Success. There certainly wasn't the entrepreneurial rage that there is now, and the idea that there's such a thing even called a startup. People started real businesses. So at the age of 28, I partnered with a sales guy, and we started a garment business, and we were buying agents. We manufactured clothing for some of the largest retailers in the country. And I learned how to run a business on the experience of running a business. I really had no managerial training whatsoever. We just kind of did it.
But it sounds like your background gave you all this managerial training, so you just implemented it all into your learning.
Yeah. I mean, that's, when you're doing it, you don't have those reference points until later when you can turn around. They say hindsight is, you didn't have the hindsight because you're just in the doing of it. There's so many things that if I had the information I have now about certain things that are more about how do you create the life that you want versus getting what you get, I would have added that to, and that's what I try to teach Kieran now. In those days, it was what we needed to do. I needed to work. I was also married. I started my first business when Kieran was 1, and I think part of the reason I started my business is because when I was pregnant with Kieran, at that time, the employer I worked for, when I found out a month after being hired for that job that I was pregnant, I didn't know, asked me if I'd considered not having the baby. And it was sort of like, are you kidding me? And that was actually something that was asked. People like that today would get, put in jail or fined.
Right.
But back in those days, that seemed like he thought that was a really smart question for him to ask. And
I
then,
think it's terribly rude.
It's just unbelievable. And then, you were constantly being put on a plane or sent here or sent there, and and you're controlled by someone. And it was sort of like, if I want to have a lifestyle and be a mother and have a little more control over my destiny, having my own business seemed like it was a good idea. Now, of course, you end up working 80 hours and you have other complexity, but you could decide at some point, that you could be there at a play, or you could take your kid to a doctor's appointment, or you didn't have to, but you could. Nobody was going to tell you you couldn't. So that was a big choice.
So you definitely had the flexibility of working for yourself, and you had the flexibility working for yourself, but you were really supporting 3 children and doing a career change. So good that you didn't want to get involved in anything too fast.
Well, thinking back on that time, there are some historical criteria that make it very interesting. Here we are talking about offering people flex time. Well, being an entrepreneur was my flex time.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so I was able to, I used to say, the biggest perk of the day is I could take a bubble bath at 4 o'clock if I ever wanted to, but it didn't usually happen. Knowing that I would be able to do that was a big one. And now here you are looking at what they're trying to change in the way work is done with tools we didn't have then. This digital world is very...
The whole work life is completely turning itself upside down with the internet. With the laptops, you see people with laptops all over the place working ungodly hours. I know when you work for yourself, you don't work a 9 to 5. You're working whenever. You know, you can get up in the middle of the night and just log on and say, oh, I got to do something, or an idea popped in. Do you...
It's a great question for Kieran, because this is her generation and she is living that entire dream, right? Talk about like where you work and a work day for you.
Well, what was the question exactly, though?
The question. Okay, so we're talking about, what do you do? I mean, you two work together, and you're in a social media.
We have a marketing agency. Yeah,
that's what it is. Okay,
Yeah.
so I know it's
WYSIWYG. What you see, what you get. Yeah, so it's a digital marketing agency that I founded, and when Kieran graduated from college, initially she started freelancing for me while she was looking for work. She became very quickly invaluable to me, and one of the reasons that is because she was really knowledgeable about a lot of the technology, social media, and things, because this is something she grew up with. And so, you know, I could see that she was an asset to me in some of the things that I was trying to do. So now it's been almost 3 years, and Kieran is my business partner. And I decided that I wanted her...
How does it feel to work for your mom?
Oh, I don't
Well,
work
she
for
doesn't
her.
work for me.
I work with her.
Yes, we got very smart. I read all those articles on millennials and, you know, how you need to engage them so that they'll participate fully. But Kieran, you know, works from home. Maybe you can talk about, you know, your schedule. You know, she's a remote office and a remote worker, and, you know, she is in charge of her day.
Well, let me ask you, okay, you work from home. You have your flex hours. You have your own schedule. But before we go into a little bit more detail, do you feel that you miss anything by working at home?
Sometimes I do. I think one of the things I would love to clarify is that the word entrepreneur kind of has this bells and whistles kind of notoriety that, you know, you think entrepreneur, you think woman or man in a suit going to a huge building with lots of people, drinking their coffee, drinking their other coffee at the same time, you know, just always on the go, always on the run. That's not what always an entrepreneur is. I consider myself an entrepreneur, but I work from home in my pajamas every day, and it is great. It's mostly a matter of motivation, and you kind of have to be strict with yourself. I have a lot of friends and people I know who, when I tell them what I do, they always assume that I'm a freelancer. And like a freelance person is any less than an entrepreneur. In a way, I consider freelancing and entrepreneurship around the same thing. You have to work for yourself and work sometimes harder than most people would if you were working in a traditional 9-to-5 job where you had bosses and those bosses had bosses. But I find that work is evolving, and I think that the work that I do from home, anyone could do, really. It's not, you don't have to go to an office and have that same experience that you just described. And that's what I like about it. There's control. I can take a bubble bath at 4 p.m. if I want to, but I never do because I'm too busy. And I mean, I don't know if that answered the question.
But do you feel that you're missing something as far as interaction with other people?
No. I don't really. A lot of my friends love to go to that day-to-day 9-to-5 job and interact with their coworkers and you know, interact with their bosses and interact with clients. And frankly, I find that that slows me down. I really like to work by myself, and I enjoy the life that I've started for myself, having this flexibility. And it may be unconventional, but I don't see why anyone else couldn't do it or wouldn't want to do it.
How is it working with your mother?
It's great. It's really easy. I mean, you know, sometimes I raise my voice to her and she raises her voice to me, and none of us has to be worried about getting fired because we're related to each other, and that's fine. But we know how to talk to each other, and it's very easy. And I know when she's available, and she knows when I'm available, and I can't imagine anything better than working with her.
Do you do Skype?
No.
Not much. No. We text and email, and like Kieran said, we're very busy, and so we organize ourselves. You know, at the beginning of the week, we talk about what needs to get done, and then we speak whenever we need to in between. A lot of times we have to speak to our customers, so we get updated with our customers as we speak to them, and we find out what we're both working on. Mm-hmm. But we sort of made it so that she's independent within her own activities, and I am too. And in some areas, I might direct what needs to happen, but Kieran's fully responsible for the outcome of what she's working on. And I think we're both Aries, so anybody who knows anything about the zodiac is that we're both incredibly headstrong and very, clear and focused. And so we understand that we need our own independence in what we're doing to feel satisfied with our work, and so we respect those lines.
I'd say that one of the interesting common factors in this generational entrepreneurial family is really related to character and nature. It's not for everybody. I would never go out there and say you really should be an entrepreneur because of these perks. In this case, it works because everybody has above average energy, highly motivated, much more motivated than ambitious. It's a very different, they don't feel like they're climbing any ladders in a corporate structure. They love to get the job done, pile the work on. They can't stand it if it's not done. So they're ideal in their role in entrepreneurship.
Which brings me to the next question. What are some of the traits that somebody has that should not be an entrepreneur?
You have to be fearless, right? You need to be absolutely certain that you possess within yourself the means to overcome what gets thrown your way. You don't have to have the answer then and there, but you have to feel confident that when it gets thrown over the transom at you, you can field it and handle it. And then I guess my favorite thought was always, you don't have to be Einstein, just a little smart, but not Einstein, and you can solve almost every problem.
Or know who to find the answer from.
Exactly.
Now, what would you say is the biggest detriment that women entrepreneurs have that they should get rid of?
I mean, I never had a conversation until recently because the press keeps talking about how women are different than men. In my mind, I didn't really see any difference. It wasn't something that was called to my attention. I didn't grow up with my father around me every day, and so there wasn't really a voice of a man that was, Kieran gave me this new expression, I didn't know it, it's called a mansayer. It's like when a man tells, a mansplaining. Mansplaining, so it's when a man explains to a woman how it is because he's a man and he knows best. There was no mansplaining in our house. I had brother-splaining, sister-splaining, mom-splaining, French people-splaining, but there weren't any father-splainings or mansplainings. So I didn't really have there's this authoritative other voice that you're supposed to, bend to. So I went into my career and I really didn't have that sense of, women are this, men are that. Today, I think there's a ton of conversation about that in entrepreneurship, that women are more this and men are more that, and our brains are more this and their brains are more that, and we like that, and we can't raise money and they can raise money, and there's lots of stuff. I listen to it, and some of it annoys me terribly, and some of it I understand why it's there, but I really don't think there's a difference. I just think there are entrepreneurs. To me, entrepreneurs are like different breeds of dogs. Like if you go to the dog park and you see all the different dogs. You see the beagles do what beagles do, and the Labradors do what the Labrador do, and the pit bulls do what the pit bulls do. And if you start to see a dog behave like a different breed of dog, it would be really strange. They're kind of instinctively their breed. And I think entrepreneurship is a little bit like that. It's like you said, Mom. There's certain things that are maybe inside of you that make you go that way versus not. And if you don't have it, you probably aren't drawn to that. Because it is, and Kieran and I had this conversation just the other day, is, I think you said something to me about, she was doing a freelance job somewhere, and she had to wait for them to give her the next thing to do. And so for like a half an hour, she was waiting for the next thing. In her day, she has 20 next things, and she knows exactly when she's going to do them. And the contrast of, being directed versus directing yourself, I think that's one of the key differences of an entrepreneur. It's like you're always thinking of the next thing you're going to do and why and how, and you're not waiting for somebody to tell you it's okay to do it.
Going back to your social media, do you do a lot of social media, or do you do advertising, marketing? I'm not sure.
Yeah, mostly social media marketing on Facebook.
On Facebook?
And graphic design.
I'm mostly a graphic designer, yeah.
Ah, okay.
I just had the amazing experience of having my granddaughter do my website.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes. Okay. Now, she has been around me a lot all these years. She knows me very, very, very well. She knows my strong points and my weak points, and she wanted to do something really great for me. And I realized halfway through the project that I couldn't really tell her anything. She already knew better than I did the direction it had to go, the language that you had to communicate it in to get the result that you wanted. It's so exciting and liberating to say, kids, take over. Great, I love it.
Well, as an artist, it must be kind of hard because you're selling yourself all the time. Well, we all are selling ourselves all the time, but I would say it reflects more in your artwork. So how do you overcome that to make a statement?
Again, I think that the art and my approach to the art is very much a continuation of the entrepreneurial way. I don't expect anybody to do anything for me to make my art more than what I can make of it. And so if I have to learn how to market myself, I do. If I have to learn social media, I do. Maybe not willingly, but I do. Right? The ability to go to the end of the limits of my own capabilities is all that I'm interested in the art. Whether the marketplace